we have three sections as usual. The first is going to be why this law nightmare that we're in is almost over with regard to the presence in our daily life with Mr. Trump. The second is going to be about the specific charges that might be filed against him. And then in the third, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court and the specific decisions that they made and what we can do to think about that and respond. So as you know, all of us really since Trump announced and came down the elevator in June of 2015 have thought it might be over at specific times. First in the groping episode, and then Charlottesville, and then on through the various the Ukraine episode and so forth. And so we're all pretty worried about thinking that it's over when it's not over, because we've been disappointed in the past. This man is less qualified and less able to be president than Buchanan. I mean, this is really awful. And of course, most awful is by the time all the disclosures are made and books are written, every single cabinet secretary that ever worked for him is going to disclose the things that Trump asked him to do, like invade Colombia and such, or asking whether Finland was a country. But obviously his malevolence is unsurpassed. And so we'd like to think that the Cassidy Hutchinson disclosures are the final straw. I think they are. I think it's obvious that we're not going to know that for sure in any particular second. That's not how it's going to happen with him. The man loves public attention so much that he would never go away all of a sudden. It just would not happen. He'll fade, of course, but I think it's, let me say why I think it's over. First, when Cassidy Hutchinson, you notice they're pushing back the Trump forces on whether Trump did or did not lunge at the Secret Service agent, but they're not pushing back about whether Trump threw his lunch at the wall or yelled at the Secret Service. They're not, I mean, what they're pushing back at is a minor detail. They're not pushing back on the idea that Trump said not to use the devices during the rally that would detect that Proud Boys and Oath Keepers had weapons. And the reason for that, as told by Cassidy Hutchinson, of course, was that he's been interested in crowd size from the beginning, and he wanted the armed people to be counted and not be outside the barrier. But that means he knowledgeably sent armed people to the Capitol. We don't know, of course, whether that means that he could be charged with inciting a riot, but we do know that that's congressmen and senators hate when presidents send armed people to the Capitol. They think it's a bad idea. It's interesting because we say that this has never happened, but in some of our lifetime it did. In 1954, some Puerto Rican nationalists shot up the House and wounded 3-4 congressmen from the gallery. Anyway, so first, the most telling thing that she said was that he knowingly sent people in that direction. And that is enough to horrify the Wall Street Journal, Washington Examiner, almost all Fox News commentators except Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity. There'll be a lot of confirmation. Basically, what Cassidy Hutchinson does is give other people cover. So it's hard to be first when have been a lifelong Trumpite. It's hard to be the first to do disclosures like this. And it just gives room, once you've been the courageous ones, for other people to say things and do things. And so I think what will happen is I don't know how he pronounces his name, but Cipollini, the White House counsel. I think they just subpoenaed him. The big issue, of course, is whether he'll testify. Cassidy Hutchinson said that he told her that if Trump went to the Capitol, he would be faced with innumerable charges of felonies, and it would be nice if he would say that to the committee. It's possible that the subpoena they just issued gives him protection to do that, but I wouldn't guarantee it, but I think it's likely that he will testify. Maybe more importantly, there's hardly anything that's easier to bring it politically against a president than a witness tampering charge. And it seems pretty clear that Trump forces tampered with Cassidy Hutchinson before her testimony. Liz Cheney won't let that go. And the nice thing about that, if you think of the politics of charging an ex-president with anything and how we hate to set the precedent of subsequent presidents, administration charging a previous president with criminal acts during his presidency, since that's never happened. But it would be nice to have a nice juicy witness tampering charge, because Americans understand that it would be a nice sell. The polls are starting to reflect, I'll say some more about the polls, but they're starting to reflect the shift away from Trump. Most notably, there's some polls showing DeSantis leading Trump in New Hampshire. Of course, as we know, DeSantis is basically Trump with a brain who understands, the various branches of government. It'd be scary. I don't think as scary as Trump, because I think he recognizes that those branches exist and probably has even read the Constitution, I think the bigger threat to us, parenthetically, is Nikki Haley. I think she made it a point to criticize Trump after January 6th, but not too severely. And I think, of course, she wouldn't be as scary as Trump has been, but I think, at any rate, the Wall Street Journal has now editorialized against them. The Washington Examiner, a lot of major donors are going away. You're starting to see him faltering, and Republicans faltering because of him in the polls. So I think he's not going to run for president. I think we're done. It's a scary thing to celebrate prematurely when you're talking about something of this consequence, but I think I'm going to go into which charges will be brought. I think there will be at least some charges of felonious behavior, and I'll go over which are most likely to happen. But in this opening segment, I'm saying what's different about this time and not other times is you're not hearing even the Kevin McCarthy's of the world come to defense over the substantive things that Cassidy Hutchinson said. That's because they were in the Capitol when people with guns were invading the Capitol and yelling, "Hang Mike Pence," and "Where's Nancy Pelosi?" And if you're a congressman, that's not an insignificant thing. So what Kevin McCarthy agreed to do with Trump forces was stay away from, once Nancy Pelosi wouldn't name Jim Jordan, they pulled their participation from the committee. And now Trump is criticizing that because, of course, every TV session is not a normal congressional hearing. It's put on for our benefit to tell us what happened. So you're not getting some boring congressman yielding the balance of his time to his colleague from South Carolina. Instead, I saw Representative Kim Schreier, and I asked her before the hearing started whether she was confident that they got it, that committee, in terms of how to present themselves to the American people. And she said, they very much did, and I think that's been proven. I think they put on a memorable demonstration of what happened, and that's why I think that no one's defending him on the things that are most consequential. Instead, they're talking about, well, this is distracting people from inflation, which is the real story. They're not defending him on the substance. They're not going to. And that means it will hang out there. And then all you get is Trump saying he barely knew Cassidy Hutchinson and stuff like that. So I'm saying at the end of segment number 1 that it's over. I think it's over. Questions or thoughts?
I have a question. I was just wondering about Miss Hutchinson. She apparently, I think the fact that she was threatened is very obvious, because a month before that she even came on the scene here, she changed her lawyer.
And Trump was paying for her lawyer before then. So that was obvious. Trump was paying for her lawyer until then.
And is no longer paying for her lawyer. Yeah. Therefore, she's being threatened because she's now speaking up the way she wanted to.
The way that Liz Cheney presented that, I think it's pretty clear that they're going to be able to prove that that happened and that it was witness tampering. So the hard part would be to say that Trump directed it, because of course he didn't make the call. The tamperer, either Meadows or an associate of Meadows, reminded her that Trump reads the transcripts. So, I mean, that was a thuggy thing to do. Thuggy thing number 1,643 at last count. So, yeah, I think it's good stuff. Remember, this all started because Republicans have different delegate selection rules. So as you remember, Biden won near the end because Obama and others got Democrats to drop out. So Biden would do well on Super Tuesday, so we would not have a prolonged battle. Republicans don't, and that's because in Democratic primaries, your delegates awarded are proportional. If you get 30% of the vote, you get 30% of the delegates. Hi, Christina. With Republicans, they do winner. Most of those races are winner take all, and there's nothing better when you have 6 candidates, which they did, or 8 or 10, to have somebody who persistently gets 30% of the votes. So if you look at the first 10 or so primaries where Trump was declared the presumptive favorite, it's because no one would get out. Cruz stayed in, but he would have been Ted Cruz. But to the extent anybody was a moderate in that race, they weren't going to leave. As you remember, Kasich stayed in for a long time. So they weren't able to select the one person that would keep Trump from being elected. And of course, that's the danger going forward, because in those primaries, you don't have to get 50%, you have to get 30%. And it's proven that even with its present problems, that you look at the primary results, J.D. Vance got 34%, and Dr. Oz got, 32%. And the low 30s is where, in a contested primary, is where Trump's candidates are going to go and where Trump will go if there's several candidates. Any other comments on my feeling that it's over? I'm going to head into the specific charges.
I have a comment. When Cassidy said about the drivers, that Trump wanted to go to the Capitol, and he grabbed the steering wheel and then went for the clavicle of the other man. Are those the 2 men that want to testify now, or are they other Secret Service people?
The people who want to testify are, remember that Cassidy said that 2 Meadows aides told her that. Yes. If you read up on one of those Meadows aides, he's a former Secret Service man himself that Trump liked so much that he made him an aide even though he was a Secret Service agent. So that's who wants to testify. He wasn't there. He's just going to say he didn't tell Cassidy Hutchinson. The committee, for some reason, did not give the Secret Service a heads up. I don't know what they're going to say. And to me, it really, if there's contested testimony over whether the clavicle was contacted, to me, it's you. It's really a sign of how desperate they are that that's their big issue.
Yeah, that's their big
He said 6 things at least that are much worse than that.
Well, I just wonder if it was a lure to try to get the Secret Service to testify under oath, that get somebody. That was kind of the first thing that popped into my cynical little head.
Yeah, and I don't know what whether if you're a personal Secret Service agent, I'm sure they do not want to be involved in testifying about and Trump has the ability to guide who's in his details, so those aren't going to be Secret Service equivalents of Cassidy Hutchinson for sure.
And I just wonder, has any other president bought lawyers for people that worked for them before? Or is this?
Oh, I imagine. I don't have a history of that, but
yeah.
Remember, if you're going to get charged with something, or even go before a congressional hearing, your lawyer bill could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So you would want a president to do that, but as you're implying, it does have a tendency to secure the allegiance of the person whose legal bills that you're paying.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice that she went private.
Absolutely. So,
well, let's go on to our second theme. This is the biggest one of all, of course, and we've been thinking about it for a long time. Remember, as I said, that it's just a sec. All the liberals in the world want Merrick Garland to charge Donald Trump, and he should. But I agree with him that it's a non-trivial event. We're looking for you could make the argument, just like when Jerry Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, that the nation needs to heal, and you could argue that healing isn't about bringing felony charges against the former president. On the other hand, I have to say that when the former president attempts a coup, we have to make an exception. We really don't have a choice. Once you have evidence that a coup is being attempted, you can't say, well, it didn't succeed, so therefore we won't charge its perpetrator. So that's, I think, why there's no choice but to proceed, and I think he will. So what are the excuse me, there's 3 most likely felony charges. The first, as you know, is in Georgia. Fonnie Willis, who's the district attorney of Fulton County, has an awesome case against Trump for a criminal solicitation to commit election fraud. What that involves is asking somebody to tamper, and it's often reported, because he have it on tape, that Donald Trump said to Raffensperger, can you please find me 11,270 votes. But it's not often reported that he threatened him with criminal sanctions if he didn't. And I think, I don't know what the lawyers that put Trump on that call were thinking, to record a call where the president of the United States asks for election results to be changed. And as you know, he called him twice, not once, and Lindsey Graham called him before that. I don't know what they were thinking, but I read the statute this morning. I don't think it could be any clearer. And the nice thing about that is this grand jury, you've got both Brian Kemp and Raffensperger involved, who are Republicans. And the grand jury, of course, is citizens. They've and 50 witnesses. I think an indictment will be brought for criminal solicitation to commit election fraud. And the nice thing about that is it's not Joe Biden. Obviously, Fani Willis is a Democrat, but it's happening in a state, and American people are well familiar with that evidence. There are two charges that are key in DC. The first, that's the hardest one, as you know, is three charges counting the tampering. There's, let me go with the tampering first. Witness tampering is obstruction of justice. That's clear. There's no argument over witness tampering as whether it's obstruction of justice. The argument would be who you would charge in this case, unless you had evidence that Trump ordered that to happen, which you're not going to have, then charging Trump with tampering will be difficult. But that doesn't mean Liz Cheney won't pursue it and pursue it well. The two things that would most likely to happen with regard to felony charges by Merrick Garland are, and remember all along that Benny Thompson's committee is Merrick Garland's dream. You don't want what, obviously Trump politicized the Justice Department. You don't want this Justice Department giving you weekly reports on what they're thinking. You want Congress to do the investigation. It's true that the Justice Department has tools that Merrick Garland, that Benny Thompson doesn't have. Notice that the other day they were searching John Eastman's home at dawn and seizing his electronic devices. So they have some tools that they're employing, but it's a great thing for Merrick Garland that the committee's doing that. It's a step-by-step process, but it's changing American opinion. The two things he could charge with is first, obstructing an official proceeding of Congress. So the official proceeding happened to be counting the electoral votes. So not insignificant. It's not like they were debating farm subsidies in Iowa. Not that that wouldn't be important too. The deal there is Cassidy's testimony is meant to tie Donald Trump to the incitement that caused the disruption. So that's the hard part. The court cases on what you have to do to incite are pretty strict in saying, remember, he didn't say go assault the Capitol. He said go to the Capitol and fight for us. So obviously, if he gets charged with that felony, he will claim that he didn't have anything to do with the actual entering of the Capitol. However, that's why Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony has everything to do with how much Giuliani was hanging around the West Wing, talking about Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. So and that's why they're making such a big thing of Trump sending armed people in the direction of the Capitol. They're trying to get him on obstructing an official proceeding or conspiring to obstruct an official proceeding, and that's what they're trying to do. The second thing that will come more clear in the final hearings is they're trying to get him on criminal conspiracy to defraud the United States. That has to do with everything with the fake electors. Of course, they will be able to prove that he was involved in the fake electors strategy. So that, to Merrick Garland, is the easier of these charges against Trump. And you'll hear more and more about that. That hasn't been the subject this last week, but they are working very hard on that, and that's outside of the tampering, the most likely felony charge. So if Trump is arrested, of course, he won't be jailed. He'll be let out. And then the court action will start, even this Supreme Court is not gonna block a grand jury's indictment of Trump. They're not gonna say you can't prosecute a former president, just not. The other thing that has been raised is, couldn't we have a felony charges against the grift, the fact that Trump raised $250 million to defend himself in court and has been using it as a political slush fund. What the lawyers are saying is, no, we're not going to succeed in doing that. What could happen is a civil cause by a civil suit by someone who gave him the money, arguing that he took it under false pretenses and never intended to spend it in that way. So that could happen, but it's not going to be the basis of a felony charge as much of a grift as it was. So that's what my thinking is on what he could be charged for and why. And I'd be willing and happy, in fact, to take questions or comments.
Okay, anybody? Wow, apparently you covered it very well there, David.
No, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Okay. So,
Even though you live in another time zone, we're going to.
I do another time just down the street from all of this stuff, which is incredible. So I know you're probably going to touch on it, but I just wanted to key in this new case that the court is taking up, the SCOTUS is taking up next year. Is that the same thing as these fake electors? Is that like tied in here somehow? That they would make those fake electors somehow okay to do?
Well, there are different situations, but they're not unrelated. So first, the fake electors would be a simple fraud charge, and there's a lot of case law about what represents fraudulent behavior, attempt to defraud the United States government, and this would fall within those definitions, well established in case law that it would. So we've got that. You just would have to establish that setting up slates of alternative electors and sending them in was a fraudulent act. Obviously, they'll say, well, there were legal actions in progress and we wanted to protect our interests, but I think what the United States will maintain is that the selection and certification by themselves were fraudulent actions. What Christine is referring to is the court took a case about a doctrine that will be argued next year having to do with the powers of a state legislature on election law to be free of, among other things, the courts. I am hoping that there's not close to 5 votes for that. That would, blow up our system. And I'm thinking that that's a 2 or 3 vote deal that they want to dispense with, but I haven't read up on it as much as I need to. But it's totally separate. I mean, that is, they can move forward on these fraudulent electors, and the court would not maintain that it wasn't fraud, because the court wouldn't link the 2 cases that directly. If they charged Trump with fraudulent behavior, they wouldn't say it wasn't fraudulent because state legislatures can act independently of their courts, because in a lot of these cases, these weren't state legislatures anyway. So they're tied. The third thing that's tied, as you know, Christina, is they're trying to make sharper the process. They've got a bipartisan group trying to make the January 6th process sharper in terms of underscoring 30 times that Mike Pence did not have that power. And in that proposed bipartisan compromise, they want more senators to have to challenge than they got. right now, as you know, one senator could challenge and stop the whole thing, and they're fooling around with the compromise they will change that law. So those are three interrelated issues as to how we protect elections. Shall we go on to our third issue? What time do we have?
Yeah. Oh, Bonnie?
Yeah, if he's charged, does he have to be found guilty in order for him not to be able to run or be, what's the bottom line of what would happen so he can't be politically active?
He would have to be convicted.
Convicted, okay.
Yeah, or plead no contest. If he pled no contest, then that it gets marked as a felony. But he being charged would obviously be politically damaging, but it wouldn't disqualify him from running. You know, there's a argument that it would be the best thing in the world for him to run in terms of our chances of winning, but I don't think any of us want to take that on. I think we've had enough. This has affected the last 6-7 years of our life, so let's not do that. So I'm going to go on to the Supreme Court cases, but first I'm going to, in our last segment, we're going to talk about these Supreme Court rulings because they're monumental and they signal something for the future. But as usual with liberals and progressives, in some cases they're not as bad as they seem. They're plenty bad. I'm not trying to pull us out of our desperate hours. I'm just saying let's take them one by one. It's an awful thing to know that this all happened because Ruth Bader Ginsburg shared our belief that Trump wasn't going to win. So as you know, Barack Obama talked to her about retiring while he was still president, but she was quite comfortable to wait to have Hillary Clinton. And the court was her life, and she was comfortable to wait and have Hillary Clinton appoint her successor. But thanks to James Comey and Putin and so forth, that didn't happen. And so if John Roberts had 4 other judges to work with, such as Merrick Garland or somebody else, he would have the power to create compromises on all these things. And as you know, he wouldn't have overturned Roe. He would have found new spaces and a new definition of viability or something to keep Roe alive. So we did it to ourselves, but we didn't think he was going to win either. But she took a bigger risk than we did. At any rate, let's go over 4 decisions. There's 2 decisions on church and state. These are not monumental cases. As you know, the First Amendment provides not only for the prevents the establishment of religion and calls for the free exercise of religion. So every religious support case turns on the weighing of those 2 principles relative to each other. And that all happened because Jefferson in particular did not want the Church of England to become the official religion of the United States. And in fact, ultimately, Patrick Henry walked away from the whole thing because he did want the Church of England to become the official religion. So what happened in Maine, what happened in Bremerton is basically a dispute over whether that coach was acting officially and in a way that it would be hard for a 16-year-old football player to walk away. And the court made up some facts to defend him, but it's not going to significantly change life in America. The Maine case, they said that if there are parts of Maine where there is no high school, which there are, and if the state elects to pay private schools to educate high school students in those areas, then the state must pay parochial schools as well as private schools. Well, it's a very limited decision. They're saying basically you can't not pay a church-related school if you pay a non-church related school. You could elect as Washington does, to have high school coverage in the entire state. And then you won't broach that issue. The gun case in New York is troubling because it affects 5 or 6 other states. Let's say at the outset that what the United States Congress just did on guns is monumental. Absolutely, they should have banned assault weapons. But you hear something like red flag laws and you say, well, what could that mean? You know how many red flag orders judges have executed in Florida since those killings down there? 6,000. They have taken guns. Some of those are suicide issues, but they've taken guns. These orders last for a year. They have taken 6,000 guns away. So let's not sneeze at the ability of a judge to remove a firearm from a troubled person, since arguably there's many of the mass shootings where that would have been hard to do and easier to do if we have red flag laws. Anyway, and the Supreme Court overturned the way that New York approves concealed weapons permits. In New York, they make people have a showing that they have security problems. In a lot of states, they just have to prove don't have a criminal record, or that they get their background checked. And the court didn't touch those laws. And they touched New York because the person who they say have a Second Amendment right to have a firearm, therefore should not have to prove that they can exercise that right. You don't have to prove that you can exercise your speech right, for instance. So like a speech right, where you famously can't yell fire in a crowded theater, you have to make a showing of why somebody's not able to exercise their constitutional right now that they've decided that your right to have a firearm is constitutionally protected. So the court said you could declare sensitive areas where people, so you don't have to let people carry guns into hospitals or courts. Or unfortunately, as Breyer pointed out, they didn't define which are sensitive areas. So New York's about to pass a law to define a whole bunch of sensitive areas. My sweetie, who was a librarian here, notes that Kitson Regional Library for years has banned guns in those branches. So I think it's just an issue of how broad the states are going to be in defining sensitive areas. But my point is that what the Congress did and the actions they took is more significant than that concealed weapons case. It is weird to have millions of weapons. Anytime you see somebody with a firearm in public, you're thinking, this is undoubtedly a crazy person. I'm going to get a ways away from them. I mean, there's just no sense to it. So on to 2 cases that are much more significant. The big EPA case says that EPA does not have the authority to do blanket regulation of utilities with regard to the carbon they throw off in their power generation. What that is it's a 50-year-old law. It doesn't mention carbon. The Obama administration, with the absence of Congress, changing the Clean Air Act to improve its attention to carbon, interpreted their regulatory authority to cover carbon, and the courts basically said with that monumental of an interpretation, there's no question that Congress would have to be involved and change the law. I had a friend who wrote to me and 100 other people saying the court ruled there's no constitutional right to fight carbon. That's not what it said at all. It's a battle over the authority of the executive branch relative to the legislative branch We fought that battle a lot when Trump was president. We argued that he was exceeding his regulatory authority when he stripped down a lot of these regulations. So this is a common argument. Unfortunately, since we don't have 60 votes in the Senate, it's hurtful because we're not going to get improved power plant regulation. The court did say they could regulate it case by case, so we're not dead in the water, but it's a big setback given that we're already are insufficient in our carbon strategies. And then finally with Roe, obviously monumental, and it might be monumental in the other way because it might help us keep the House and take 3 or 4 Senate seats in the fall. That would be good. The only 2 silver linings, as you know, is there's a constitutionally protected right to travel. Kavanaugh, in a separate opinion, reminded people of that. He said it's he didn't say non-controversial, but he basically was signaling to his colleagues that that it's not debatable. The reason why that's important is that means there's 5 votes to overturn a state law that forbids somebody from Mississippi from going to Illinois. The 5 votes being Kavanaugh, Roberts, and the 3 liberals. That's hugely significant that Kavanaugh did that, because protection of the right to travel and overturning state laws that criminalize people that do travel is absolutely necessary. So that's good news. The other good news, of course, is now there is a pill that you can use to self-abort in the first 10 weeks. And I think it's 10. At any rate, that's a little more complicated because right now, if you're in Washington, you can have a state law that influences how somebody from Illinois can sort of order prescriptions online and so forth. States have some jurisdiction over what gets sold to their residents. It would be pretty easy. There's some international pill providers, so it's not that it wouldn't be easy to get the pill. I think this leaves us with huge gaps, women that don't know how to do these things or are just too overwhelmed to do these things. So I think Roe's the decision is a tragic decision, but these are the 2 bits of the 2 parts of silver lining that are present. And that's my report on the court. I would say just quickly, as I was saying before, that Warnock now leads by 10 points in Florida. Fetterman's ahead of Oz in Pennsylvania. So I'm hoping we're going to be able to turn our attention to North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Ohio, at least. And the thing about picking up 3 seats or so, a lot of you are very mad at Kristen Sinema, Joe Manchin. Whether or not you ever did anything with the filibuster rule, it decreases their influence to not need them quite so badly. So picking up even 2 seats, picking up Fetterman and Sherry Beasley in North Carolina and not losing any seats would do that all of a sudden on certain races, on certain issues. Schumer would just let Manchin go and he could vote the other way. So that's my report for the day. Do we have questions, thoughts, concerns, insights, or insults?
Sheila? Oh, do you have something to say? Go ahead.
No, I was just, is there any possibility of recalling any justices from the Supreme Court?
I don't even know that there's a process for that to be a congressional process for impeachment, but they wouldn't do that, and the liberals wouldn't do it, and they're not going to pack the court either. So what we have to hope for is bad health from one of those 60-year-old justices, or otherwise we're in for a long haul on this. All I would say, I talked to Billy Fletcher, who's an appellate court judge. So some of you know about him. He's from Seattle, but he's Ninth Circuit. And I made the point with him that he conceded that there are tiny areas of law where this court would be less problematic if you had a Democratic majority in Congress. And that is, Gorsuch in particular is pretty deferential to Congress when Congress does something explicitly. So that would be the only silver lining. Other than that, it's going to be a storm for a long time unless we just happen to lose one like we did when Scalia passed.
My question had to do with the fact that it would appear that at least two of the justices lied during their hearing.
I think that'd be a matter for Congress. I mean, you use the term recall. Well, they're certainly not they weren't elected in the first place, so it wouldn't be recall. Yeah, they might censure them or something. They're not going to, Susan Collins, who bought into that crap in the first place, now that she's made her statement, needs to get us far away. Of course, she just got elected for 6 years, so she's in good shape. But someone who would accept an anti-Roe justice saying that it's settled law, I mean, I just think that it gave her plausible deniability. But it is true that both Gorsuch and Kavanaugh said that quite clearly. I mean, if I was Manchin or Collins, I'd certainly be annoyed with them, but they're going to be on the court. They're not going to be recalled or impeached or removed.
That's too bad.
Well, I think, I get accused of being too positive about life in America, but I think we've had a conservative court before, and I'm reveling today in the fact that we still have a government that yet again I'm under enormous threat. We've had a peaceful transition of power. I don't buy at all Robert Reich and others saying that in 2024 we have a worse threat. For the most part, the denialists that are running for Secretary of State and such are running in Republican states. And in almost all cases, there are multiple layers of defense, as long as the Supreme Court doesn't change the role of legislatures. And the federal government during those elections will be controlled by a Democrat. So a lot of things Trump was able to do to try and have a coup was because he was the sitting president. And there won't be a Republican in 2024 who's a sitting president. So I think that provides enormous protection. And we sent Kim Wyman out from Olympia to DC to help do that.
That's true. Yeah.
So I don't think we're under a bigger threat in 2024, but vigilance is the price of liberty. So let's
Rita.
I was just going to say, I think this might be a real wake-up call about what Congress can do so much more work and pass laws to protect the American people. And that's their job, and that's what we elect them for. So I think we as voters need to be vigilant about that as well. And not just for Congress, but to be vigilant in our local things about who's going to be running the elections. There was a program on NPR. I heard that we're like down in the South, that the Proud Boys have made and their groups have made very concerted efforts to be voted in certain things on school boards, on election boards, on all kinds of things. So I think it's important that we're vigilant about our very local elections and people, you know, in our local things and in our state as well. And
I
so
think
that's our jobs.
I think that's true.
Absolutely. Agree.
And along that same line, you know, since Derek Kilmer doesn't have a serious challenge, we could think that there's nothing for us to do here. But Tim Schreier's awesome congressman from Bellevue, and she needs, I think she could make it, but she's under a very severe challenge. And watch the race in Inslee's old district. As you may know, Dan Newhouse was a farmer who never voted against Trump in his life, voted for impeachment, and he's being challenged by Lauren Culp, the nutcase who was a former one-person sheriff of Republic. And if that happened, that Culp was one of the two finalists, then Doug White, who's the Democrat, can beat him. So keep an eye out on that.
Yeah.
Because that could happen. That's a real possibility.
Yeah. Right on. Anybody else? Let's see. Anybody else have a comment, question? No? Okay.
Good to
well,
see all you people.
Yeah, it's good to see you and hope to see you next month.
We'll
Stay
still have
healthy.
a country a month from now, I promise.